Welcome everyone to today's 20-minute ILTA YouTube session entitled, What's Your ROI? Using Data to Drive Your Decisions. I'm your moderator, Shawn McClurg. I'm the Director of Practice Solutions at Miles and Stockbridge, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by our two speakers, Ann Halkett, Director, Solved eDiscovery Services, a division of AHBL MLP, Alexander Holburn, and Adam Wehler, Director of Practice Support, Robinson Bradshaw. Welcome, Ann and Adam. I'm going to let you two introduce yourselves. Why don't I start with you, Adam?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shawn. My name is Adam Wehler. I'm the Director of Practice Support. As Shawn said, I've been in the legal industry for nearly 20 years, and so have been through a lot. So looking forward to this.
And I'm Ann Halkett, as Shawn mentioned, and I'm situated in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, so provided the international perspective for this panel. And I'm not going to say how long I've been in legal, a very long time, because I don't want to age myself.
Yes, I've started doing that myself. Let's just say it's decades. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's all.
There we go. That's perfect.
More than 10 years.
Yes.
Excellent. So Ann, why don't we start with you? How do you define ROI?
ROI. There are many ways to define ROI, and it depends who you're talking to and what you're trying to measure. I mean, in the basic sense, it's obviously the traditional way is profits over losses. So, you know, are you making money on what you're doing? Are you losing money? And you can look at it in different ways in terms of efficiencies and user feedback. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I mean, there's soft ROI, and there's hard ROI. But I'll talk about that a bit later.
Okay. What about yourself, Adam?
Yes, I think I really define it as usage. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what we go to. When we're talking about usage, we are talking about how much, you know, if we invest in this, how much do we get back out of that thing? And, you know, we will go through, you know, different examples of that. But yeah, that's how we really look at it.
Oh, fascinating. So what tools do either of you use to measure ROI? Why don't I kick it to you, Adam, since you just sort of, you know, indicated usage. How do you measure that? You know, what systems do you use? Is it just a basic Excel? Is it other systems? Obviously, it differs. So let's, to the extent that we can keep it general, let's do that.
No doubt, no doubt. We can use any, it really depends on what I'm looking for. Obviously, I love using Excel. I think, you know, there are various people who would cringe at that, but I love using Excel to crunch numbers. But we do use advanced accounting tools, certain billing tools to also, you know, kind of get statistics to put into that. So yeah, there are various things that we use in that fashion.
Fantastic. And what about yourself, Ann?
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I've created relativity workspaces
That's awesome.
To track data on projects, you know, on a particular project or whatnot. And, you know, just building it out and making sure everyone knows what the functions and features of it, dashboards, whether you build a dashboard yourself, whether you have a vendor, if you're working with a vendor on projects, you get them to build dashboards. But I'm also a big user of Excel accounting programs, multiple accounting programs, because typically you may be using multiple places to, you know, charge or whatnot. So pulling information from all these systems. And with that, the classification of the data is really important, because if you don't classify it or organize it properly, you're not going to get any value out of it. It'll just be useless numbers at the end of the day.
Right. I agree.
That's a fantastic point. How do you, I'm going to go a little off script and I apologize in advance. For the listeners, this is an improv question, as it were. So how do you determine when you need to make that decision to measure the ROI on a product? Is it just across the board, every project? Is it, I mean, obviously we're all sitting sort of at the director level, so we're responsible for bringing in technologies, bringing in people, things of that nature. So how do you make the decision at that point then to sort of say, okay, I need to start measuring some ROI on this project or product or anything like that? And I'll kick it back to you. I'll start with you with this improv question.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me put you on the spot.
Well, again, it goes back to the question is like, figures speak to people. They're always willing to listen when you have the data behind what you're trying to get across. So if you want to bring a tool in-house, what are the infrastructure costs? So, and if you got the infrastructure costs, you have to look at how long is those servers, how long will they last, how how often you have to replace them, what additional software, your disaster recovery for that. You need someone to upkeep it. There's a lot of factors. So it's figuring out all those pieces of information at the outset to help you, and then plugging in the numbers associated with that. And then once you have that information, you can move to the next site. I mean, that's just infrastructure. There's so much more than that.
Right.
But once you have those details, that will help you with your pricing of your services, right? So then you can make the argument, well, we're spending this. And then, how should we be pricing the services? Obviously, you have to be mindful of what's happening in the markets. You have to keep an ear to what others are doing, whether, in your country or elsewhere, and price accordingly. You can't be too high or too low. I mean, but again, and then there are so many factors. It depends on your clients and what they're willing to pay, and to do with the soft ROI, what are you hearing from your lawyers and clients about what you're doing?
Yeah, and I think my answer to that is really when I want to make something objective versus subjective. If I can, identify and make an argument or identify something and bring a subjective perspective to it, then that's fine. But, there's some times where you need to ground in objectivity of, okay, here is the positive, here's the negative, and here are the numbers beside of it. And I think that's when, if I really need that objectivity power, that's when I start grasping for the numbers and the ROI. Because again, you can really sometimes make numbers look better or worse. I mean, really, you can make them subjective, but it's a lot harder to make them that way.
Perfect. Okay. So I guess this leads us nicely into our next question, which is how do you apply those ROI calculations, those ROI numbers, to next steps, to sort of the, decision making, either negative or positive?
Yeah.
And, Adam, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think from my standpoint, it's really I'm a scientist by nature. My original major in college was astronomy and astrophysics. So applying those numbers really brings out a story. And now you can say, even before you maybe have a hypothesis, this tool is being used or this tool is not being used. Now you can really see that data. And I think from our standpoint, we don't just measure usage on amount of people. It may be amount of usage by 2 people. And so really knowing the type of data you're looking at allows you to get that and apply it to the decision making. Can we renew? Should we go out and look for something different? Should we, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, should we hire another professional? So that's really where we can go.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would add that where can we better spend the money? So if, the spend is it really worth it? If there's not enough usage of, say you have a particular platform or whatnot, or tool, maybe you need to just outsource those tasks. There's not enough associated with it. And that can also work to building in efficiencies in what you're doing. So how long are things taking? Do we need to evaluate how we're doing things? If you think about it at the outset, when you've been in this, automatically we need templates because we don't want to reinvent the wheel each time, because we know that's going to save time and money. And at the end of the day, we're very cognizant about doing this for a reasonable price, right? So building in those efficiencies, but looking how long things are taking, and obviously hearing the feedback is this is costing too much, it's taking too long, tight deadlines that you all have to meet, building those in, but looking at the numbers accordingly.
And I like that too long perspective by Anne, because it's really important to not only have ROI on whether or not you should get that certain thing, but have ROI to say, should we spend the time to get that certain thing? Because having intelligence on how long it takes you to do something is almost equally as important.
I agree.
And in terms of sort of determining next steps, again, I'm going to go a little off script here. Is it something where you need to, who are the stakeholders that you're answering to, or that you're sort of coming to make the decisions? Or is it something where sort of at your levels, Anne and Adam, the stakeholder on some level is you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we increase efficiencies? What can we do here? That sort of thing. And so you need that data to be able to make those decisions. So Anne, I'll again, unfortunately, you sort of bear the brunt of my improv questions, but here we go.
No problem. No problem, Shawn. Lay it on me. So at the end of the day, we all have, we've all got our bosses, regardless of where you are, and you have to justify what you're doing to somebody, somewhere, regardless, right? So at the executive level. So I have to report to someone who's above me, and they report to people as well. There's quite the structure. So have to justify what we're doing. And obviously, if things are taking too long, or people are complaining, obviously, when you look at the soft side of ROI, right. It's, people are complaining like, well, my goodness, this was a mess, or this went wrong, or, because your people don't know what they're doing because you didn't take the time to figure out that they need more training, because that's a cost that you need to factor in, is continual training on processes, software, et cetera, so that they're able to do their jobs and qualified. But looking at all those things, those are the next steps. So we all have someone, and at the end of the day, inherently, we all want to do a good job. And we want to be, you want people to recognize inside and outside of your firm that, hey, they're doing a great job over at Alexander Holburn. Why can't we be more like them?
Right.
Yeah, and I agree. I think from my side, it's really, you mentioned ourselves as stakeholders, because most of the time when I report to my superiors, they're going to want a perspective or a recommendation. There are some times where, hey, here's A and B, here's A and B. I really need you to drive the decision here. But most of the time, I want to be able to have a perspective and a reason why we should pick A or B. And I think, myself as a stakeholder, again, we have to run these technologies, build in this processes. So we shouldn't sell short, our perspective and our drive on these things.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And like you said, we make the recommendations, like, should we do this? Should we do this? I mean, here's what we see happening in the market. I mean, but does that necessarily apply to your firm at this point in time? Right. I mean, what's your level of sophistication? Can you handle it? Maybe you can't. Maybe not now. Maybe in a couple of years. What's the long-term plan? Do you have the ROI behind? Where do you have do you have all the numbers, the statistics?
I need to go take a nap.
You know what I mean? Do you have all this behind it to meet that goal? So what are your goals, right? So
right.
Okay. That's wow. All right. Let's it's all incredibly good information and fantastic to think about. I'm going to skip to question 4, and then I'll come back to question 3. So, because we were having that conversation, sort of what are the most important pieces of data that you're looking at in order to make these decisions in terms of ROI? And you're mentioning soft and hard costs. For our listeners, I'm just going to say that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think by soft you mean sort of people related or subjective measurements versus, hard costs, which is where you can look at, okay, we have X amount of data stored, it's costing us this amount, how much are we recovering? Here's our ROI in that front. So and they require completely different measurement structures.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the client satisfaction. So are the clients happy with what you're doing? If the clients are happy, then your lawyers are happy. What's the firm's reputation in this area? Will that drive business in terms of what you're doing? Is it a value-added service? What's the value of it to them? Something that you're bringing up in RFIs or otherwise. Your staff is happy. What's the morale level? So they're getting the training that they need. And obviously you want to keep good people. So when if you've got good people and they're happy, so it's like anything, it's a well-oiled team. It works really well.
Yeah, I agree with Ann there. I think, making sure I don't think there's a most important piece. I think, when you start to hone in on one versus the other, you kind of lose perspective of what the whole story can be. You don't want to initially come into something with a bias. We talk about that in the AI world. So you don't want to come in with a bias, especially when you're looking at the objective piece, those pieces of ROI, and you want to add in some of those subjective stories as well.
So it's sort of, both, in terms of important pieces, it's you want to keep your eye on both sort of the objective information that you're getting, but simultaneously there's always a subjective piece that you have to also be cognizant of and be, sort of ensuring that you're seeing the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to be aware of what's happening around you. You can't just focus on numbers alone, because if your customers aren't happy, the numbers are meaningless.
Correct. Correct.
Right.
So,
very good point. That's a phenomenal point. So to come back to the third question, do you only use ROI for tech? I mean, and I think we've sort of already answered this, but I'm going to ask it explicitly anyway. Do you only use ROI for the technological aspects of our jobs, meaning, the softwares and programs and things of that nature that we're bringing internally, or can you apply it to hiring decisions as well?
Yeah, I think both. And it needs to really be done in both, because I think it's powerful, just as powerful in the hiring world as it is in bringing on technology. You're bringing, and, I always relate this, you're bringing on both to work for you, to be perfectly fair. So it both need to be looked at.
I agree. I mean, you have to justify the need for additional heads in any department. Like you have enough work for them, or if there's a new area that holds a lot of perspective that that there's work, can you justify the hiring? Maybe you'll take a hit for short term, but you've got the leadership behind you and this recommendation that that for sure, like, we're going to promote it, we're going to go after it, we're going to make it happen, kind of thing. And then it's just driving the bus. So at the end of the day, you're driving I always say that to the group. You have to drive the bus on this project. They're relying on you as the leader who knows what you're doing with this. You must drive the bus. They cannot drive the bus. For this, they do not have the skills. You do. You have to drive the bus. So.
That's phenomenal. I'm definitely going to steal that. So I've always said building the house, you're the contractor, but I like driving the bus better. Yeah. Do you use any anecdotal information, hearsay as lawyers put it? And again, I think we've already sort of touched on this point, but to add better understanding to the data, or to sort of, I don't know, when you're making these presentations to people to sort of help make that point in terms of here's the numbers, here's some additional, subjective or anecdotal information.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the client stories, right? So the client stories or the case studies in terms of what you're able to accomplish with what tools, with what people, what time period, and then how the clients reacted to that. And those are, the numbers are one piece, like, oh yeah, we did this, it cost X, great.
Right.
But at the end of the day, everyone wants to know how the clients are perceiving this. Are they happy? Are they not happy? Maybe you achieved this, but the client's like, this was terrible. This was a disaster. I'm never going to do that again. But if the client's like, wow, this was phenomenal. Why didn't we know that you could do this before? My goodness, we're going to give all of this work to you. It's like, wow, that's the best thing that could ever happen. So.
Yeah, and I think most of this really starts as anecdotal data because somebody comes and says, I have this problem that I can't solve, whether it's a legal problem for our lawyers, a technical problem, or what have you. And so you have to take that and go and look at it and go, okay, how can I, do this? How can I provide this better service? As Anne's saying, how can I wow people? Everybody, was just at ILTACon, hopefully, and, a little spark of imagination from Disney, but like, that's really where everything begins. And I think that's where, the numbers come from. It almost comes from that hearsay start. And where you're like, okay, I can really go and get those numbers. I need to tell a story. I like to use, instead of drive the bus, be the head coach. You've got to look at all the data and put the best players on the field and call the best play. And so, that's where I think hearsay is really good.
Agreed.
Well, we only have a couple minutes left, if not less than a couple minutes. So is there anything additional that either of you want to add in closing, something you feel we didn't touch on, or something from your notes where you're like, oh yeah, I also wanted to add this in?
I would suggest starting small. So if you are not used to, calculating, or maybe you don't know where to start, if you're outsourcing, start keeping track of all those invoices with your vendors, and figure out what you're spending the money on. I'd also recommend a really good book called How to Measure Anything: Finding the Value in Intangibles by Douglas Hubbard, which will give you insight on how to measure things. I'll leave it to Adam for the rest.
Yeah, I think my final thing is to always be curious. I think curiosity, is instead of, a lot of people in our industry want to jump to solve the problem. Let's go, we have a problem. Before you do that, step back and really be curious about why the problem is there. And that will lead you down an investigative route to really start this process. And I completely agree with Anne. It can be overwhelming. And so starting small and really starting to dive into this is really key.
Well, thank you both very, very much. I really appreciate all the time. I feel like this is a conversation that could go on for much longer, but unfortunately we have a hard stop. So thank you both so much for your time and expertise. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Enjoy.
Thank you.